Welcome to the second seminar in the series Evidence and Democracy in Times of Crisis. My name is Eivind Engebretsen. I'm a professor in interdisciplinary health sciences at the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Oslo. And together with my colleague Tobias Bach, professor of political science at the same university, I'm very honored to chair today's event. This series is part of the Circle U ambition of setting up a democracy hub, which has as its overarching ambition to examine the alarming trends in parts of Europe and elsewhere where democratic values are undermined and discarded, and also to develop strategies to strengthen democracy and civic engagement more generally. And we intend to do so by engaging academics, students, and external partners in co-creating knowledge and also in raising fundamental and critical questions regarding the functioning of our democratic institutions. And this is also the ambition of today's seminar on news media and trust in times of crisis, which is held here at the University of Oslo as part of the Oslo Peace Days, and of course also inspired by this year's winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov. Currently, the concept of trust in politicians, in governments, and other relevant institutions, such as public authorities and news media, is highly debated and problematized, both within academic discourses and beyond. And this debate has been triggered by various challenges, such as the fight against disinformation and conspiracy theories, the decline of trust in legacy media, the rise of the post-truth era, and more generally, the difficulty of reflecting complex and shifting global realities, such as climate change, health crisis, security threats, and mass migration. And the news media are historically and normatively presented as the guardians of the functioning of democratic institutions. At the same time, the mistrust in the ability of the news media to fulfill this democratic role has rarely been expressed in such a vociferous way as it is currently. And this seminar will focus on the theoretical and practical issues raised by the concept of trust, emphasizing the following question in particular. To what extent can the erosion of trust in news media undermine trust also in democratic institutions? And I now hand it over to you, Tobias, who will introduce our speakers.
Yes, thank you, Eivind. Yes, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's two speakers. First of all, at least from our perspective, joining us online is Olivier Standard, who is an assistant professor at the Louvain School of Communication at UC Louvain, which is one of the partner universities in Circle U, and he's also Circle U chair of democracy. His main research focuses on journalism study and comparative studies between journalistic cultures and markets. He was previously the co-director of the Observatoire de recherche sur les médias et le journalisme, the research unit dedicated to media and journalism at the Louvain School of Communication, and he is now chairing the Louvain School of Journalism. After Olivier, we will have our second speaker, Oline Marie Sæther, who is now halfway through her medical studies at this very university, the University of Oslo. She's currently taking a break from her studies to work full-time as an elected student representative at this university's student parliament. She's passionate about strengthening the voice of students in the university democracy, and she has written several pieces about this topic in a newspaper for higher education institutions. Oline was also a student leader at the Faculty of Medicine when the pandemic erupted and functioned as a liaison between the faculty leadership and the students during the most hectic days of the pandemic. So before I hand over to Olivier, just a very short remark that you're very welcome to ask your questions or to give comments using Mentimeter, and you can start doing that already now. Thank you so much. I now give the floor to Olivier. Olivier, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for this introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to engage some reflection and discussion about this important topic as you have presented. So the question I would like to discuss here is indeed the same as Eivind asked. To what extent can the erosion of trust in news media has an impact and undermine the trust in democratic institutions? As you can imagine, this is a very large topic, so please excuse me if I will be focused on some aspects only, but we will have some time to ask questions and discuss other topics maybe later. So I first would like to start with some theoretical notions, because the concept of trust is very debated in social sciences and in communication sciences, and especially in journalism studies. So when we look at the theories of public engagement, we can see that trust in public institutions includes a kind of belief, a belief that the perceived institutional performance will be conform to the individual expectation. So when we talk about trust, there is a kind of risk and a kind of uncertainty. It means that someone needs to rely on someone else or something else, for instance, an institution. So there is this notion of risk and uncertainty, because no one in our complex society, no one can master omniscient knowledge, no one can learn everything from everything, and we need to make decision on others' point of view, on others' actors, for instance, institutions. And as Putman says, the greater the level of trust within a community, the greater the likelihood of cooperation, and cooperation itself breeds trust. So you can see that on a global level and on a global theoretical perspective, the notion of trust engage individuals in a process of believing in someone or in something, because we need other information. For instance, we need information from other actors in order to make informed decision. When we look at journalism and media, and we can theorize journalism as a social institution. In fact, journalism is an institution. It's more or less the same issue. It means here for journalism, and we talk about information, the willingness of the audience to be vulnerable to news content based on the expectation that the media will perform in a satisfactory manner. This is globally the same problem than for other institutions, but on the specific topic of information, accuracy, and truthful information. And when we look at the many previous studies about trust in media, we can summarize things like that. Trust in news media incorporates 4 dimensions. Topic selectivity. It means that every media made some choices. This is the agenda setting and the gatekeeping functions. a media doesn't have the possibility to inform people on everything. So the selectivity, the evidence selectivity, we have to show as journalists, as media, we have to show that our information is reliable, that we have checked our sources, for instance. The belief in accuracy and faith in the information relevance, it means that information will help me as a citizen to make some decision and to know what is an opinion, what is a fact, what is a possible future. So all in all, trust help us to reduce the complexity of our world and to reduce the uncertainty of a very open future. And you may imagine that in our nowadays, with the health crisis, for instance, the question of complexity, uncertainty, and the future are very important as well in terms of trust and in terms of information. But as it was precise in the introduction, we are facing a deep crisis of confidence inside the journalism market, and in many media systems, many researchers point that we are living a crisis of confidence. I would like to briefly present here three symptoms of this crisis, and briefly say that it depends, of course, it depends of the cultural background, the political background, the media system. So this crisis is not the same, probably in Norway and in Southern Europe, in Russia and in the USA. Of course, it goes without saying that this crisis has different intensities depending on the media system, the cultural and the political background in where we are living. But a first very visible symptom is the low and declining rate of trust in news and news media around the world, especially, this is important, especially in major democracies. That's probably important to say in the context of this seminar. Another symptom is that behind these trends, journalism very relevance comes to be increasingly questioned, and sometimes in a very aggressive way. And it concerns the epistemologies of journalism, for instance, the epistemology of objectivity, of neutrality. What is truth? What does that mean, the truth? Or should we talk about factuality? Okay, so you can see here that even the most basic and the most fundamental roots of modern journalism, his epistemologies, are increasingly questioned. So especially the epistemology of objectivity. But also practice, daily practice of journalists are questioned and criticized. The roles, the normative roles of journalism, watchdog role, mobilizer role, the role of advocacy, the role of engaged audiences, all this role very well established in the history and in the discursive history of journalism. All these roles are questioned more and more. And so as an institution, as a global institution, journalism comes to be more and more questioned and criticized, and the legitimacy, the authority of journalism does no longer go for itself. A third symptom, very worrisome, concerns the attacks, physical attacks, threats, online attacks, and disqualifying discourses about and on journalists as an institution, at the media organization level, at the newsroom level, at the individual level, every level where we can terrorize journalists is subject to attack and disqualifying discourse. Once again, it depends on the country, it depends on the context. And these disqualifying discourses sometimes come from the top, from authorities, from the rulers. Think about Donald Trump, for instance. but it also comes from different segments, different parts of the more and more fragmented audiences. And of course, in our digital world, the social media gives an incredible soundbox to these aggressive discourses and different kind of attacks. So these are the symptoms that we are observing as media scholars about the trust in news media. And so if there is a crisis of confidence, we should, of course, ask who is responsible for this? What are the responsibilities? And yeah, briefly said, two point of view, two perspectives here. First, we can take a look at the responsibilities of the media practitioners, the newsroom, the journalists, okay? For instance, it is well known that the cynicism and the negativity in reporting has bad effects on how people perceive media. We sometimes see media scandals, plagiarism, wrong quotes, false identity of journalists, for instance. From time to time, we can spot what we can call media scandals. It doesn't help, of course. More globally, there is a very strong competition between newsroom, between media corporations, and the obsession of speed, the obsession of the scoop. The constant research for new revenues doesn't help, once again, the media to be seen and to be perceived in their citizen, in their informational and in their political roles. And recently, in research, especially from the USA, in the USA, but not only in the USA, of course, there is a growing concern about the lack of representativeness inside newsroom. And for many scholars and for many observers, they consider that many news organizations are still too dominated by a male perspective, by a white perspective, by an upper class perspective. So just think about, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement in the USA. We have seen many voices claiming that the media coverage of this movement was not fair and was not representative of the different voices and the different problems that the civil society faced in the USA. So the lack of representativeness is a very important problem in terms of, for instance, media bias. But okay, that's a media perspective, and we are here looking into the media and the newsroom. But there is another perspective of more macro perspective, and in a broader point of view, we can also I think we all agree that external actors create antipathy towards journalists and media. I just mentioned Donald Trump, but look what happens in Brazil, in Philippines, and in Hungary, for instance, and you will see that it's not only in one country and one only president. There is a general skepticism against institutions, not only journalism, but other institutions. This general skepticism goes and concerns the authority of journalism, the legitimacy of the legitimacy of journalism, the capability to say, okay, we are the institution that inform people on a daily basis. Another very crucial question is the role and the growing role of platforms and the platform distributed content, the role of algorithms. So social media play an important role in the distribution of content. Think about echo chambers, bubble filters, and so on. Okay, there is a lot of research about this, but of course, it's a new actor in the ecosystem of information, and in many ways, media must deal with this, and it's not easy at all. So, for instance, we are now in an era of conversation, opinion, and new ways of reaching audiences that creates a gap between the old epistemology of objectivity and what happens on social media, where everybody engage, gives opinion and talk about, for instance, his personal experience. So responsibilities from two perspectives here, and I will be very happy to go deeper in this discussion later. And so I would like to conclude and to finish this quick presentation with the question we asked in the first slide. Undermining trust in news media, which effect on democratic processes? I'm not able, of course, to make a systematic review of what happens in every country and in every media system. But okay, think about the new book of Matt Carson about the press in the USA after Donald Trump, and their conclusion in the first in the slide here. I think it's very important to cite it: the lack of a shared set of facts. Here we go. We are exactly in what we are discussing here and now. Lack of a shared set of facts. This is the mission of one of the missions of the media. And it led directly to the domestic terrorism and insurgency on January 6 at the US Capitol. This is the conclusion of American scholars about, well, probably one of the most worrisome events in the recent history of the USA. But more globally, disinformation acts or disinformation campaigns can affect strongly in some occasions, can strongly affect, for instance, elections. Think about the former election in the USA in 2016, what happened during the Brexit campaigns, during the election in the European Union 2 years ago. There was a very high concern about disinformation. And for instance, the European Commission launched 2 years ago a high-level group of experts on disinformation. And so if people do not trust news media, if news media are suspects, how can people make informed decision for their lives, for their daily lives, but also for their future on a truthful, reliable basis? It's really difficult if even quality papers, even public service media face some skepticism and distrust. And so another conclusion in many research is that the erosion of media trust may go hand in hand with a decline in political trust, which puts this question and how problematic here beyond the scope of journalism, but in a more general way in the public sphere, in the public and the political dimension as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for this very stimulating talk. I will now immediately hand over the floor to our next speaker, Oline Marisæter. And I would like to remind our audience that you're very much welcome to ask your questions or to give comments to this seminar on Mentimeter, and we will be able to ask those questions to our speakers in the after Oline's talk. So Oline, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, to those on Zoom and those with me here in the room. I don't know about you, but for me, it's kind of a loss that we're not all gathered here in the same room, because giving a presentation to a whole room full of people can be quite a kick I usually quite enjoy. But at the same time, you can say that Zoom has a lot of advantages, like talking to people from all around the world at the same time, to the more simpler advantages of being able to put a hat on your head when you feel like it. Sorry, Bad joke, perhaps, but I feel like we have to focus on the positive sides of the Zoom sometimes as well. On to today's point. And not to become too philosophical just minutes into my presentation, but isn't that quite a common thing with new developments in our society? That there's some advantages, but also some disadvantages? You lose some, you gain some? One thing I've learned during my 25 years here on Earth is that it is seldom that you have one right answer to, or one perfect way to solve a problem. For instance, if we look at how different countries went about to tackle the corona pandemic, I'm not sure if anyone actually found the perfect way to tackle the pandemic. There are pros and cons to all strategies. And that's what I would like to focus on here today. The pros and cons of how the Norwegian government communicated the reasoning behind restrictions during the corona pandemic. And in what way did their communication strategy affect people's trust in both the government and the news media? But first, a little about me. I'm no expert on this. I'm a 25-year-old medical student here at the University of Oslo. But I'm maybe not your typical medical student. I started medical school 5 years ago, but has only finished 3.5 years out of the 6, as I'm now in my second gap year, where I take a break from my studies to focus my time on the student democracy here at the university. Meaning that I work with strengthening student participation in everything from projects at the university to educating the student representatives in the different boards, but also strengthening the student voice and try to make sure that our voices are heard and that our opinion matters in things that concerns us. The biggest challenge with this is, in my experience, securing good communication between the university and the students. Because open communication is essential for building trust, and trust is essential for democratic institutions to function. And not to put my work with the student democracy in the same league as what the government does, but it seems that the Norwegian agencies also value good and open communication. At least the government agencies chose to be very open about what they were certain about and what they were uncertain about when communicating about the virus to the public during the corona pandemic. To be able to explain to you how the developments of the corona pandemic was and still is relayed to the public here in Norway, there are 4, you might say, protagonists you must know about. The 2 first are quite easy to understand for non-Norwegians as well, the first being the government and the second being the news media. The third protagonist is the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. It is a government agency and a research institute under the Ministry of Health and Care Services, and is also a national competence institution for, among other things, infectious disease control. The fourth protagonist is the Norwegian Directorate of Health, which is also under the Ministry of Health and Care Services. It is an executive agency, but also an advisory one. And during the pandemic, every time there was a development, the Norwegian government requested the advice from both the Norwegian Institute of Public Health as well as the Directorate of Health. Both institutions would deliver reports to the government with risk analysis of the situation, as well as advice on what the government should do and what measures should be taken. In the reports, the Directorate and the Institute of Public Health didn't always agree on the evaluation of risk, nor on what measures and restrictions they advised the government to enforce. Both reports were always shared openly with the public. Of course, should these reports be shared openly with the public, would many say, open access to information is essential in a democracy, even in times of crisis. But at the same time, isn't there a risk that such open information might create confusion among the public on what was the best thing to do, especially since the reports sometimes didn't come to the same conclusion? Because for many Norwegians, during the most intense days of March 2020, the access to information became a bit of an information overload, I think. One factor was simply the amount of information available and the situation itself with the pandemic erupting. But the second factor was that the information wasn't always clear-cut, since the reports didn't always come to the same conclusions. The Norwegian Directorate of Health and the Institute of Public Health could, for instance, disagree on if the government should advise people to limit the number of guests in their homes, or if the government should make it illegal for people to have a certain number of guests. And if the government should make it illegal, how many guests should be allowed? Should it be 5 guests? Should it be 10 guests? The government agencies disagreed. Another topic that was heavily discussed was also if the schools should stay open or if they should close. It was an important democratic principle for the government, the Institute of Public Health and the Health Directorate to give the public access to all the information available so that the public could better understand what the government based their decisions on. An important democratic principle indeed, but for the public, many were terrified of the new virus, the ambiguousness of the information provided made them doubt if the restrictions the government ended up enforcing were enough, or were maybe the restrictions rather too strict. Now, let's add the news media to the story. How did the media deal with that the 2 advisory agencies to the government gave different advice? Did they build up on the confusion, or did they try to clear it up? I think that in some ways the news media was also a bit confused. Many journalists did their best and tried to explain Many journalists did their best and tried to explain why the 2 public agencies gave different advice to the government. And the public paid attention. The TV program, the debate, Debatten in Norwegian, discussed the corona strategy up to several times a week during spring 2020, and invited both independent researchers from the public agencies, normal people representing the public, as well as ministers from the government to debate the corona strategy. The debate was one of the most discussed TV shows during spring 2020, even for people down in their 20s like me, and was important to many people because the TV show tried to explain and help the public navigate in a very confusing situation. But the news media is also dependent on people reading the news, and there were several examples where the news media tried to frame the professional disagreements between the Directorate of Health and the Institute of Public Health into a conflict. It has for sure been an excess of clickbait-friendly headlines regarding the disagreements between the 2 agencies, where the article itself has done little to provide information about the pandemic, but rather form a picture of the professionals quarreling like teenagers, illustrated with this picture here, where you can see that the representatives from the Directorate of Health, the Minister of Health and Care Services, and the Institute of Public Health are not very happy with each other. What were the effects of this whole situation with regard to the trust in the news media and trust in the democratic institutions? In Norway, the general trust in the news media is quite high, especially to our national broadcaster NRK News. We believe much of what we read. Our trust in our democratic institutions is about equally high. But trust is not something you gain and keep forever. It is something you must continually work to preserve. I think the Directorate of Health, the Institute of Public Health, and the government are all aware of this. That is perhaps the reason why they chose to be open about the different views and risk analysis that were produced by the government agencies. Even though it to some extent created confusion, they also knew that if they didn't play with open cards, they wouldn't preserve the trust of the public, a trust which was vital in order for the public to agree to follow the restrictions that were enforced during the pandemic. At the same time, the trust the Norwegians have in that the news media is objective did in some ways contribute to undermining the trust that the government agencies were trying to preserve with their open communication, with the news media trying to frame the professional disagreements as intense and personal conflicts between the most powerful health leaders. The news media to some extent managed to build on the confusion and skepticism the public already had towards the restrictions that were enforced, and thereby also undermined the trust the public had towards that the restrictions were necessary. But news media was also vital in helping the government explain to the public the reasoning behind the restriction and explain it in a way that the public could understand them. and not as 100 pages long reports with professional language and complicated graphs from statistical analysis. In many ways, the news media also help preserve the public's trust in the democratic institutions as well. Okay, I'm now trying to reach a conclusion to this lengthy story with our 4 protagonists. And I think we can at least conclude that there is a reason why the media is called the fourth estate power. The effect the media can have on public opinion is powerful. It can build trust and undermine trust just as easily. And as news media has an essential role in relaying information between the government and the public, the trust we have in media affects the trust that we have in our democratic institutions. And when the public nowadays increasingly prefer news that is quickly and easily read, the role that the media has is quite challenging. Relaying complex information in just a couple of sentences is difficult, and it is easy to simplify to a degree where important nuances are lost. How do we combat this challenge? How do we preserve the trust in both the media and our democratic institutions? I don't think my attempt at an answer will blow anyone's mind, but I think teaching the public from a young age the importance of critical thinking is vital. Educating people to also sometimes look at the source of the information that is relayed in media, even when it is 100 pages long reports about corona with complex graphs from statistical analysis. And as long as the public remains critical, both to the news media and to the democratic institutions, I think there is hope for the future of democracy. Thank you. That is all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Oline, and thank you so much, Olivier, for sharing your insights and thoughts. And to kick off our discussion a bit, I wanted to ask Olivier. Now you've heard some. You've got some insights into the role of transparency and trust in the news media in a Norwegian context, so that there was a kind of open, lots of transparency about different opinions, and this was even taken up in the news media. So I would be very much interested in whether you have any thoughts of this, how this plays out in the Belgian context, which is, I guess, a bit like in terms of the governing structure of the country and so on, a bit more complex than the Norwegian setting, and a bit more complex than perhaps many other places. So, what is your reaction on hearing this? Hearing what Oline said, is that something that you find in similar ways in Belgium, or are things very differently? Because you mentioned that we have to consider like the local context. So how would you see that in the local context of Belgium?
Yes, that's a very, very interesting question, because comparing, in Belgium, to be honest, we often see Scandinavian context and Scandinavian countries as examples for the level of press freedom, for instance, the level of trust in media, and Oline mentioned it's that the level of trust in Norway is quite high, and probably higher than in Belgium. Belgium scores not bad at all. That's not the problem. I think the problem is, as you mentioned in your question, the complexity of the political structure in Belgium clearly does not help for having a consensus, for having a common action. We have plenty of ministers in charge of health, for instance, 9 to be clear. So, as you can imagine, it gives a lot of confusion. Olin mentioned the word confusion. It's really, I think, a key word of this crisis. And so in this context, the role of the media is clearly complicated because which minister should we listen to? The federal one, the Flemish one, the Walloon one, the one in charge of Brussels. So, okay, confusion, and there is clearly an interplay, a link between the political structure and the media system. So we do not have the capability to have one global voice. Yeah, it doesn't prevent Belgian media to be sometimes unified and to have globally the same vision, but it's more difficult probably. And to answer and to react on what Olin said, I think she mentioned the role of teaching and education. And this is absolutely crucial because we are not able to develop skills in media analysis, in media critics without a specific teaching. I think the world is getting more complex, but also the media are more complex. We have many different kinds of media, investigation media, mainstream media, tabloids, public service media, niche media, specialized media, and sometimes extreme media. Think about Breitbart in the USA or Valeurs Actuelles in France, for instance. All those voices must be studied because, they give and they have an important role in the circulation of information. So I think teaching, education, and one last comment, she mentioned open communication. And you can see in every report from media practice owners, for instance, from the Reuters Digital Institute, and they always conclude that transparency is one of the solutions for the future. They believe that journalists must explain how do they work, why did they choose that topic, why did they choose that sources, why is the media coverage of this topic like this, and giving access to the kitchen, in fact. So open communication, transparency, and in fact, in their history, media do not often speak about their own job, in fact.
Thank you so much for that interesting response, Olivier. I just wanted to follow up on this because we are talking about you were talking about critical thinking in your talk, and isn't there some kind of potential conflict between critical thinking and trust? Because, I mean, or to frame it differently, is trust always a good thing? We could even say that some of the democratic institutions have grown out of a lack of trust from the Enlightenment and onwards, I mean. So, isn't, in the sense of critical thinking, so where's the balance here between trust and criticism? Trust and skepticism?
Interesting question, but I think maybe there's different kinds of trust. You can trust blindly in someone without having any reason to, apart from that you've decided that you trust this person or this institution, and you can have trust that is based on experience. And I think blind trust in what you read and what someone tells you is dangerous, because then someone can tell you anything and you might believe it and it might be totally wrong. But if you are critical to what you hear and then you follow up on, is this true? Is there evidence behind what they're thinking? And is this something that I can find information about other places? Then you can trust what is said, but with a good reason. And so that's why critical thinking is important to gain the right kind of a trust that we need for a democratic institution to work, I think.
Would you like to comment on this also, Olivier?
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that we don't need blind trust. Indeed, as you say, the question is finally quite complex, because we in the same time need we don't need a permanent suspicion and a permanent criticism against everything that is spread by media. But in the same way, media have complex structures. They have business models. They have editorial lines that need to be understood in order to say, okay, from where do you speak? That's always the good old question. From where do you speak? What is your positioning? What is your background? What is your agenda, for instance? And yeah, it takes probably a lot of time. And once again, I underscore the role of the context and the background, the political context, in order to see, okay, if I'm reading this kind of newspaper, I should be careful. I should pay attention to this or to this aspect, because this media has a strong history in this kind of topic, or has strong links with this kind of structure. So, as you say, no blind trust, but no permanent skepticism as well, I think.
Olivier, I wanted to follow up.
Yes, because with critical thinking, it's only not being able to ask questions or check the sources of the information, but also knowing what different sources do I have, what guidelines do they follow. Like Olivier said, that news media and the most established newspaper usually have guidelines and things they follow and they fact check what they write before they publish it. So being able to know what the different sources, what's behind the different sources, and not only trust that what you read online, if you read it on a lot of different pages or forums, then it must be true. It's about knowing about the sources, and that's knowledge, and as well as the capability of being able to question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But then I think we also must consider that obviously this is relevant for when you think about legacy news media, and at least in the Norwegian context there are debates about here or you see this from time to time. Some newspaper or some TV station, they were kind of breaking ethical rules, so they have to print an article saying that we're sorry, we didn't do it right, sorry for that, and so we see these sort of mechanism, this regulation, kind of professional regulation amongst journalists, but then we have social media, and I think especially young people like you, Olina, I'm just taking you as a representative of the young generation, maybe much more into social media, into bloggers, into people on Twitter or Instagram or I don't know, TikTok or anything. I'm not a super expert here. So and there, to my knowledge, there isn't much of a regulation, and these, like, if I want to become a blogger, I become a blogger, and people may trust me more because, well, I'm a professor. But I don't think that people should trust people per se because they are professors. So, so in a sense, how does this play into the picture? I mean, why is it a problem that actually bloggers and social media and so on can just basically do whatever they want? I don't know, maybe Olivier, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yes, I think it's not a problem itself. Look at the last Pulitzer Prize in the USA. The young girl who pictured and filmed the death of George Floyd received a special Pulitzer Prize for what she did. It means that in some cases, citizen journalism and acts of journalism can also help to the profession. And so I think this kind of emerging journalistic practices and acts of journalism have their place and play an important role, and they are complementary to the legacy, complementary with the legacy media and the well-established media. And in a sense, they can they can coexist. But I agree that on social media you can read and you can spread what you want, even dangerous content. So regulation is a key issue right now for the not only for media but for the society, sorry. And look at the screenshots that I shared in my PowerPoint. You have Reporters Without Borders. You have other actors who urge for a better regulation. But when you listen to journalists, they say social media is part of the problem, but it's also part of the solution, because with social media, you can engage with audience, you can be closer to audiences, you can have a more horizontal relation and not a top-down relation with your public, your audience. So, of course, there are a lot of problems with social media, economics, editorial, and information problems, but everybody in newsroom is aware that they need to use social media in order to foster the relationships with audience.
I think that is a very good answer, and and to engage that also social media are potentially at least part of the solution. And returning to your topic of the health authorities and how they their information during the pandemic, do you think that they could have also engaged with social media differently? Also, the health authorities use these kind of media more strategically in order to acknowledge the concerns of various constituencies.
But maybe naively, but I think they did use social media and illustrations quite well. I think it was only a couple of weeks ago where they published an illustration of the mean age of people that were hospitalized with corona out of the people that are vaccinated, and the mean age of people that were hospitalized with corona that were not vaccinated. And it was such a huge difference in the mean age of the two different groups. And several times they have published such quite complex information in easy or illustrated pictures that were easy to distribute on social media. And for me, at least, social media is it's like I go there to check my news feed, and then I follow different newspapers, and then that's where I kind of see the different articles that are being shared at the moment. And then, but I don't read much of what is actually written on Facebook, for instance. I click on the links and then I go to the source. But it's difficult. Another thing that I thought about before the seminar was that last week I read an article in one of the main newspapers in Norway, Aftenposten. It's quite a trusted newspaper that said that it was very stupid of the Institute of Public Health to recommend people to use a lot of hand sanitizers, because using hand sanitizers a lot will develop a resistance in microbes against hand sanitizers. And then you would have a lot of resistant microbes to hand sanitizers on the hospitals, which would be a big problem. And I sent this article to my medicine study friends and said, what do you think about this? Because I've never heard about that as an issue. But he was linking to different things, and it was in such a trusted newspaper, so I was a bit confused. Should I believe this or should I not believe it? And I think I ended up thinking that it might have something behind it, but I'm not sure. And then just a couple of days after, researchers from the Institute of Public Health wrote an answer to this author and said that the study that you referred to was very small and has been criticized on many levels, so it is not right. But I was surprised that such a trusted newspaper would write and publish an article from a journalist with such kind of frightening news or concerning news when we are in such a situation. But it was, when it was published, it was only his opinion, so it wasn't the newspaper kind of interviewing him, it was his opinion being published. But it surprised me a little bit.
Olivier, I'm not sure if you're having some reaction right now. I'm trying to guess from your face, but if not, we can. I mean, because that brings us sort of to a perhaps a broader topic, which is relevant for us as academics, because we're now also having this discussion here in the context of a European university cooperation. So this brings us to the question about academics and their engagement with news media, either legacy news media or social media and so on. So I mean, to what extent do researchers, or what role could or should they play in working towards building trust? Should they do that at all? Is that important? Yeah. Is that anything you would like to react on?
I think it's many of my co-students at the medical school have quite enjoyed seeing all of our many of our professors on TV during the pandemic, expressing their thoughts and opinions on the situation. And I think it is very important for the professors to engage in the public debate and share the information and the knowledge they have about the subject. So definitely. But then we've also seen discussions of academics and doctors having been able to kind of take quite a big role in, for instance, the TV show The Debate, to discuss and share their opinion about the situation. And then, yes, they were doctors, but they weren't specialized in pandemic and such themes, but still they were given a big role because, yes, they are doctors, but and since the person was a doctor, a lot of people trusted that person, but then other doctors said that, but she's not a specialist in this subject, so you shouldn't trust her. And then the whole debate after that TV show was, is she a professional that the public can trust or not? So it's difficult.
What is an expert?
Yeah, what's an expert? And are you an expert just because you're a doctor, or do you need to be specialized in the theme that you're supposed to talk about? And how specialized? It's difficult.
Olivier?
Yes, I think, what is an expert? How many times did we saw this question since the beginning of the Corona pandemic? Indeed, because so many experts were interviewed. But I think, of course, Olin said, and I agree with her, academics should be engaged and sometimes participate to public debates and be present in the media, but there is always a question of the responsibility, and the question is the same for the media and for the scholars. I think, is this a good idea to be there and to engage in this debate or to participate? Is it my research field? Is it my level? Is it my expertise? In fact, and look, just think about the 24/7 news channels, for instance. I don't know if in Norway you have such media outlets. They are always on air, and so in France, for instance, you have 3 important 24/7 news channels, and with this editorial model, you always need experts, you always need debates, and there is no end, in fact. And that's probably a wrong model, because in some cases, sometimes for a precise topic for this question, it's a good idea to be there and to give your opinion and to give your analysis, but not always. Not every time, and that's the question of the responsibility and the regulation from media and from scholars, the balance is not easy. But look at what happens in these news channels. In some cases, debates are really interesting, but in many other cases, you just don't learn anything new or anything special. So in some cases, I think it's counterproductive. But that's my personal analysis, following all-in comments.
Thank you. I think we are actually running out of time, Tobias.
Yes, we are out of time. So just to wrap up, I think we and you in particular, our two speakers, have raised lots of interesting thoughts and questions that we will have to pursue also in the future as part of the Circle U cooperation, but clearly also beyond that. And so for now, I'd like to thank you two, Oline Marie Sæther, our student participant, and Olivier Standard, who was joining us from Belgium, for their excellent talks and for contributions to the panel. And I'm very pleased to see that the Circle U University Alliance is really taking shape, and I'm really looking forward to having more events in this cooperation in the future. So thanks a lot, everyone, and thanks everyone out there for joining us.